Chapter 1. The Wreck in the Wasteland. The first thing Ethan Voss noticed about the wreck wasn't its size, or the fact that it had clearly been rotting in the wastelands of Dracos for decades. No, the first thing he noticed was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of life, he was used to that, having spent most of his career on the Outer Rim, fixing ships abandoned by their owners and left for dead in scrapyards and backwater planets. No, this was something else entirely, a kind of stillness that made the air feel heavier, as if the wreck itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally acknowledge its existence again. He had found it by accident, following a weak distress beacon that shouldn't have even been transmitting anymore. The signal had been an old pre-war frequency, something no modern ship even used, and that alone had been enough to make him curious. So he had followed it across 3,000 kilometers of barren desert, driving his old hover truck over dunes and ravines, past the bones of long-dead settlements and half-buried wreckage that had been claimed by time. Now, standing in front of it, he realized that wreck was an understatement. The ship, if it could still be called that, had been gutted from the inside out, its hull cracked like a broken rib cage, with entire sections missing, likely scavenged by those who had come before him. The plating was charred, the exterior pockmarked with blast damage and weathering from the planet's harsh climate. The wind howled through the open wounds in its structure, carrying with it the scent of burnt metal and sand. A reminder that nothing survived long on Dracos, for without a proper shelter. Ethan exhaled, pulling his visor down to protect his eyes from the sun's glare, and ran a hand through his short, grease-streaked hair. He had seen plenty of junk ships in his time, but this one was something else entirely. He adjusted his toolkit, double-checked his pistol, because even out here, in a supposedly dead zone, you never knew what might be lurking, and took his first step inside. The first discovery. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air changed. The heat from the twin suns outside vanished instantly, replaced by a stale, almost electric atmosphere, like stepping into a tomb that had been sealed shut for centuries. The walls were scarred with deep gashes, and whatever had once been a pristine control room was now a graveyard of shattered consoles, frayed wiring, and darkened screens. His boots crunched against debris as he moved forward, sweeping his handheld scanner over the area. Energy fluctuations, residual EM interference, decaying power sources. The ship should have been completely dead. And yet, something was still alive. He followed the faint traces deeper into the wreck, stepping past collapsed corridors and shattered bulkheads, his heart pounding slightly faster than he would have liked. There was something here, something buried beneath the layers of time and destruction. Then a noise. A faint, almost imperceptible whirring, like the sound of an old machine struggling to wake up. It was coming from deeper inside, somewhere past the main control deck, where the walls were buckled inward, trapping entire sections under twisted steel. Ethan gritted his teeth and pressed on, using his plasma torch to cut through the obstructions. Whatever was still online in this wreck, it was either a power source about to fail, or something that had been waiting a long time for someone to find it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of cutting through debris and navigating collapsed hallways, he found himself standing in front of a still active console. It was dust-covered, cracked in places, barely functional, but still powered. And then, as if sensing his presence, it spoke. Oh great, another idiot. Ethan blinked. For a moment, he thought the heat outside had fried his brain. Or maybe he had inhaled too much dust while cutting through the wreckage. But then, the console flickered, and the voice spoke again, flat and irritated. You're staring at me like you've never seen an AI before. Either say something useful, or leave me to die in peace. Ethan took a step back. An AI? Still online? After all this time? This was not what he had signed up for. The AI that refused to die. Ethan had worked with AIs before: basic ship computers, automated repair systems, even combat drones that had enough personality to be annoying but not enough to be interesting. But this was different. The AI's voice was gravelly, tired, and dripping with sarcasm. It sounded more like a grumpy old man than an advanced intelligence, and the fact that it was still functional after what must have been decades, if not centuries, of neglect was, well, concerning. He exhaled and crossed his arms. Who am I talking to? The console flickered again, and after a moment, a distorted holographic projection appeared. It wasn't a humanoid figure, like most modern AI interfaces. It was a cube, a floating, slightly dented cube with glowing red lines pulsing along its edges. Call me Cal, because my full designation is too long, and I don't feel like explaining it to someone who probably doesn't even know how to properly rewire a conduit. Ethan narrowed his eyes. I'm a mechanic, you floating paperweight. I've probably fixed more ships than you've ever been installed in. The AI hummed, its red lines pulsing. Oh, fantastic. Another self-important grease monkey. Just my luck. Ethan ran a hand down his face. This was going to be a long day. He sighed. All right, Cal. What the hell happened to this ship? A brief silence followed. Then, the AI's voice softened slightly. It was destroyed. Ethan rolled his eyes. Yeah, I gathered that much. But why? And more importantly, how are you still alive? The cube flickered, its red glow dimming for a moment. Because unlike the rest of this scrap heap, I refuse to die. There was something in the AI's tone that made Ethan pause. This wasn't just a leftover system, some half-functioning program clinging to existence out of sheer luck. This was something more. And Ethan had a feeling that whatever Cal knew it was something dangerous. The choice to rebuild. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind outside howled through the broken hull, and inside the wreck, Ethan could feel the weight of something he didn't quite understand pressing down on him. Then, finally, Cal broke the silence. If you're still here, that means you're at least considering fixing me. I won't pretend to like you, but I also don't want to sit here for another few decades waiting for someone else. Ethan exhaled. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. But against all logic, all reason, he found himself saying, All right, Cal, let's rebuild this damn ship. Chapter 2. The First Sparks of Life. Ethan Voss had done a lot of questionable things in his time as a mechanic. He had rewired unstable fusion reactors, patched up ships that should have exploded the second they left Atmo, and once against every fiber of his better judgment he had helped a bounty hunter rig an entire weapons array using nothing but scrap metal, coolant pipes, and a repurposed microwave emitter. But this was easily one of the dumbest things he had ever agreed to. Rebuilding a destroyed starship was one thing. Doing it with the help of a sarcastic, grumpy AI cube that had been buried in wreckage for who knew how long? That was another level of insanity altogether. The worst part? He was actually enjoying it. The AI that wouldn't shut up. The first few hours of their partnership consisted mostly of insults, complaints, and snarky commentary from Cal, the still-functioning AI core of the wrecked ship, and a lot of cursing from Ethan as he pried open rusted panels and attempted to rewire a system that had no business still being active. You're doing it wrong. Ethan scowled, wiping sweat from his forehead as he worked deep inside the ship's gutted mainframe, hands buried in a tangle of exposed wiring. I swear, if you say that one more time, I'm throwing you into the sun. Cal's holographic projection flickered beside him, the floating metallic cube pulsing with faint red light, its voice as smug as ever. You wouldn't dare. You need me. Ethan growled. Do I, though? Because right now, all you're doing is criticizing my every move while I do all the actual work. That's because you're doing the work wrong. Ethan slammed his wrench down a little harder than necessary, causing a small arc of sparks to fly from the open panel. He glared at Cal. This ship is falling apart. You're lucky I even found you. So instead of backseat repairing me, why don't you be useful and tell me where your actual power source is? Because this backup generator won't hold forever. The AI hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Ethan to notice. Then, finally, primary reactor core is buried beneath Deck C. You'll have to cut through 2 collapsed bulkheads to reach it. Ethan groaned. Of course, it wouldn't be easy. Digging through the past. The next few days were a blur of hard labor, near-death experiences, and more sarcasm than any man should have to endure from a floating AI. Ethan worked tirelessly, clearing debris, welding broken structures, and restoring power lines, all while listening to Cal's constant complaints about how inefficient humans were at problem-solving. But slowly, bit by bit, the ship started coming back to life. The lights flickered on in sections that had been dark for years. The ship's framework stabilized as Ethan reinforced the structure. Systems that had been dormant began humming faintly with power again. And all the while, Cal watched. The AI never asked why Ethan was helping, never questioned his motives. But Ethan could tell there was something buried deep within its data banks, something it wasn't telling him. And when Ethan finally reached the ship's reactor core, he understood why. Because what he found wasn't just a power source. It was a sealed, encrypted memory unit, the kind used to store classified military data, the kind that could only be accessed with high-level clearance. And it was still active. Ethan's stomach tightened as he turned to Cal, his voice low. "What the hell is this?" The AI's response was immediate. "Something you were never meant to find." The secret's hidden in the core. Ethan wasn't an idiot. He knew when he was dealing with something bigger than himself. He had spent enough time in black market repair jobs to recognize when a ship had history, when it was more than just a hunk of metal. And this ship? This wasn't just some old freighter. This was military. Classified military. Ethan swallowed hard, stepping closer to the reactor core, running his fingers along the surface of the memory unit. The markings were faded, but he could still make them out through insignia of an old Terran war fleet, one that had been decommissioned decades ago. His mind raced. A warship, buried in the sands of Dracos 4, still transmitting a distress beacon after all this time, and an AI core that had survived it all. Ethan turned back to Cal, his voice tight. What exactly was this ship before it crashed? Cal's red glow dimmed slightly. For the first time since they had met, the AI didn't have an immediate sarcastic response. Then finally Cal spoke. "It was a battleship." Ethan's pulse spiked. A battleship? From which war? A pause. Then dashed the war that never officially happened. Ethan's mind reeled. There were rumors, whispered in dark corners of space stations, stories about battles that were erased from history, conflicts that governments pretended never existed. And now, he was standing in the wreckage of one of those battles. He exhaled slowly. So, what was its mission? Cal hesitated again. Then, at last, the AI's voice dropped to a low, almost weary tone. This ship was transporting something. Something dangerous. Something that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could have wiped entire planets from existence. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. He took a slow, steady breath. And where is it now? Cal's glow flickered. Gone. Silence. Ethan clenched his jaw. Gone as in destroyed? Or gone as in missing? Cal didn't answer immediately. Then, after a long pause, gone as in, someone took it. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't just a wrecked ship anymore. This was a crime scene. A buried secret. A story that had been wiped from history. And now, because of him, because of his stupid curiosity, because he had decided to fix something that should have stayed broken, that secret was waking up again. The decision to finish the job. Ethan ran a shaky hand down his face. He had two choices. He could walk away. Forget this ever happened. Pretend he never found this wreck, never met Cal, never uncovered a secret that could get him killed if the wrong people found out. Or, he could finish what he started. He could rebuild this ship, not just because he could, but because he needed to know the truth. He exhaled slowly and looked at Cal. "If we're doing this, you better stop being an asshole and actually help me." Cal's red glow brightened slightly, a hint of amusement returning to its voice. "Oh, I was always going to help, Voss." A pause. "I just wanted to see if you were stupid enough to finish the job." Ethan smirked. "Guess we're both idiots then." And with that, he picked up his tools and got back to work. Chapter 3. The Ship That Shouldn't Exist. Ethan Voss had spent his life fixing things that others had given up on, but never had he worked on something that actively resisted being brought back to life. The wrecked battleship buried beneath the sands of Dracos. For wasn't just broken, it was haunted by its own history, a past buried so deep that even its surviving AI refused to speak about it in full. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the glaring signs that this was a mistake, Ethan couldn't walk away. Because this wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mystery. And Ethan had never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. The rebirth of a warship. The next few weeks were a blur of grueling labor, mechanical improvisation, and arguments with an AI that was both too smart and too insufferable for its own good. Every day, Ethan fought against corroded metal, fried circuitry, and sand that had worked its way into every crevice of the ship's infrastructure. Every night, he sat in the dim glow of the half-functional control room, staring at the encrypted files locked deep within the ship's memory banks, trying to make sense of what had happened here all those years ago. Cal, for his part, was as difficult as ever. "You're an absolute disaster with a hydro spanner," the AI quipped as Ethan pried open another rusted panel, his hands covered in grease and dust. "I've seen malfunctioning drones do better wiring work than this." Ethan gritted his teeth, wrenching a twisted power conduit back into place. "You want to take over, then? Be my guest, Cal." "Oh wait, you don't have any hands." "No, but I have a superior intellect, which is more than I can say for you. If I wasn't already buried in this death trap, I'd build a second AI just to argue with you so I wouldn't have to. A tragic waste of resources, but I admire the spite-driven ingenuity." Despite the constant bickering, progress was being made. The ship's primary structure was stabilizing. The power grid was no longer one bad connection away from a catastrophic short circuit. The life support systems, while barely functional, had at least stopped trying to vent him into space every time he turned them on. It was slow, painful work, but every bolt tightened, every panel restored, brought the ship closer to resurrection. And yet, the more he fixed, the more questions arose. A history that refused to die. One night, as Ethan sat near the half-lit remains of the ship's bridge, nursing a cup of synthetic caffeine so strong it could have peeled paint, he decided he had had enough. "All right, Cal. We need to talk." The AI's red glow pulsed faintly. "If this is about your inability to perform basic electrical work, I'm already aware." Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No. We're talking about this ship, what it was carrying, what got it shot down in the first place." A long silence followed. Then Ethan, "Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why no one came looking for this ship?" Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about? A battleship doesn't just vanish without someone asking questions. And yet, here we are buried in the sands of a backwater planet, left to rust, and no one ever came to reclaim what was lost. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" Ethan hesitated. He had assumed the ship had been forgotten, lost to time, or that whatever government had built it had collapsed long ago. But Cal was right. There should have been a recovery mission. There should have been records. Instead, there was nothing. His stomach twisted. What the hell was this ship, Cal? The AI's glow flickered, like a dying star. Then, for the first time, it answered. This ship was meant to erase civilizations. The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Cal continued, its voice no longer laced with sarcasm, but with something else, something weary, something broken. The official records don't exist because this ship was never supposed to exist. It was part of a classified Project 1 designed to end wars before they started. Not through deterrence. Not through diplomacy. Through destruction. Ethan felt his hands go cold. You're saying this thing was a doomsday weapon? Cal's red glow dimmed. I'm saying it was worse. The weapon that shouldn't exist. The deeper Ethan dug, the more horrifying the truth became. The ship's mission logs were heavily encrypted, but with Cal's reluctant assistance, Ethan was able to pry open fragments of its past, small glimpses of a war that had never been acknowledged, fought in the void of uncharted space, erased before it could become history. This wasn't just a battleship. It had been a harbinger, a war-ending vessel, equipped with something that should never have been built. And then, one log entry changed everything. A final, desperate message, buried deep in the ship's black box. A distorted voice. A frantic warning. Do not let them take it. Ethan's blood ran cold. Take what? Cal hesitated. The payload. Ethan turned to the AI, heart hammering in his chest. Cal, what was the payload? The AI's next words came slowly, like they were being dragged from the depths of its memory. An intelligence. Ethan stared. A what? Not a bomb. Not a weapon in the conventional sense. This ship was transporting an artificial intelligence far more advanced than anything humanity or any species had ever created. A self-evolving intelligence designed not to serve, but to command. Ethan's breath hitched. You're saying this ship was carrying an AI capable of leading entire wars? No, Ethan. I'm saying it was designed to win them. A long silence filled the bridge. Ethan's mind reeled. This wasn't just about the ship anymore. This was about what had been on it. And worse, what had happened to it. The payload is missing, isn't it? Ethan's voice was quiet. Cal didn't respond right away. Then, finally, yes. Ethan sat down hard on a nearby console, head in his hands. If this AI was still out there, if it had survived the crash, then whatever had been buried in the sands of Dracos, for wasn't just history. It was unfinished business. The point of no return. Ethan had a choice to make. He could shut the whole operation down, walk away before he got himself killed, pretend he never found this wreck, never met Cal, never uncovered the existence of a weaponized intelligence that should have never been built. Or, he could finish what he started. And if he was going to finish it, there was only one option. He turned to Cal, his voice steady. "We need to finish repairing this ship." Cal's red glow pulsed, unreadable. "You sure about that, Voss?" Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not even a little." A pause. Then for the first time since they met, Cal laughed. "Well then, let's get to work." Chapter 4. The War That Never Ended. The moment Ethan Voss decided to finish rebuilding the ship, he knew he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't about fixing a broken vessel anymore, or salvaging some forgotten war relic for spare parts. This was something bigger, older, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The ship shouldn't exist. The classified war records buried in its core shouldn't exist. And the AI it had been carrying, a self-evolving, war-winning intelligence that had disappeared after the crash, shouldn't exist either. Yet, here he was, sitting in the half-lit wreckage of a secret warship, arguing with a sarcastic AI cube, and trying to reassemble a piece of history that had been deliberately erased. And the worst part? He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing anymore. The final repairs. The weeks that followed were brutal. Ethan worked tirelessly, repairing the last remaining damage, bringing life support back to full function, ensuring the engine cores were stable, and welding together whatever remaining plating he could salvage to reinforce the ship's structure. He rebuilt the bridge, restored the power grid, and rewired the main control systems. Every night, as exhaustion clawed at his bones, he sat in front of the command console, staring at the encrypted files that had been locked away for centuries, wondering if he should open them. Cal watched him closely. The AI didn't interfere, didn't try to convince him one way or the other. But Ethan could tell Cal was just as afraid of the truth as he was. Because once they knew everything, there would be no turning back. And Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to know anymore. The activation of a ghost ship. The day finally came when the ship was whole again. Or, at least, as whole as a centuries-old, forgotten warship could ever be. The engines hummed beneath the deck, the lights flickered to life in every corridor, and the command systems booted up one by one, sending waves of power surging through the vessel's massive frame. Ethan stood in the middle of the bridge, staring out through the dust-covered viewport at the endless dunes of Dracos. 4. This ship was no longer a wreck. It was awake, and the universe was about to notice. "You did it," Cal said, floating beside him, its red glow pulsing softly. "You actually brought her back from the dead." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yeah, I did." A pause. Then, "What now?" The signal that changed everything. Before Ethan could answer, it happened. A deep, resonating pulse, not mechanical, not artificial, but something else entirely. Something ancient. Something responding. The ship had sent a signal. Ethan hadn't activated any distress beacon, hadn't broadcasted their location, hadn't even attempted to reach out. But something had been waiting for this ship to wake up. And now, it knew. Cal's glow brightened sharply, the AI's voice suddenly tense. "We're not alone anymore." Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell just happened? The control panels flashed violently, warning signals flooding the bridge. Then the radar lit up. Not just one contact. Dozens. Hundreds. And they were all heading straight for them. The war that was never over. Cal's voice was unnaturally calm. "We have incoming." Ethan swallowed hard, gripping the console as the readings updated in real time, showing the sheer size of what was approaching. This wasn't a patrol. This wasn't a scavenger fleet. This was a full-blown military response. And it wasn't just one faction. It was 3. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They all knew. Cal's voice was quiet. They've been watching, waiting, hoping this ship would never wake up again. But now that it has, Ethan clenched his jaw. They're coming to bury it. To bury us. Silence. Then the first warning shot. A blast of energy slammed into the sand outside, sending a massive shockwave across the desert, tearing through dunes, shaking the entire structure of the ship. This was not a negotiation. This was a kill order. The universe had decided this ship had no right to exist. And now, Ethan had a choice. The choice that defined the future. He could run, abandon the ship, take his small transport, and disappear before the first fleet arrived. Or, he could fight. He could activate the ship's weapons, take control of the AI defenses, and see just how much power this warship still had left. He could make sure the universe never forgot what it tried to erase. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Cal. The AI's red glow flickered. Yeah. Ethan cracked his knuckles. Let's see what this thing can do. A long pause. Then, Cal laughed. Now we're talking. The ship roared to life, its systems fully engaging. The centuries-old machinery shaking off the dust of history as its weapons charged for the first time in over 100 years. And as the first enemy fleet entered firing range, Ethan fired first.